Welcome to this week's edition of the Dugout Dish Podcast. I'm Andy Kirikides, joined by my co-host, Keith Glasser. How we doing?
Great. How are you?
We got our frequent guest, college baseball expert, longtime friend, baseball savant, Jonathan Grasse, joining us again, and we are going to talk about some college baseball as the Division I conference tournament season is upon us. And there is plenty of good stuff to talk about heading into the final week before the NCAA tournament. So I'm gonna kick it over to you, Mr. Grasse, for kind of an opening statement before we unpack a couple topics here.
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple of things I think, that obviously we went through it and we talked about this back in, February, the week before, Valentine's Day, and, when the Division I season opened, and how excited we were, and, some storylines. And I think one of the things I laughed about, and I told you this earlier this afternoon, we had our, pre-show meeting, is we had to get on and apologize for our early takes at the midseason, on the midseason call. But both seem to be true, and that was the hangover of Tennessee, which I think we're kind of seeing. And they're going to play tomorrow. We're shooting this video Tuesday here as I'm watching some SEC baseball as we speak. They're going to play tomorrow against Alabama, right? Yeah, Alabama, and then San Diego has been on a roll. And they go into the WCC as the number one seed, won that regular season. So both did not look great mid-year. Both were definitely in serious question. But I think we both nailed the hit the nail right on top of the head. So that's how I'll start. I think one of the things the big one for me to look at is what. The SEC is going to probably get 6 national seeds. I think we're probably past that. Like, that's probably where we're at, depending on obviously what happens here this week in Hoover. But SEC is going to get 6 national seeds. How many get to Omaha? How many do they get total? I think will be a question. I think, is it 13? Is it 14? I think that will be, even 12, potentially, depending on how some things happen. And I'm sure we'll get to, the bid stealing stuff here in a second. But how many do they get? Number one in the national seed, do they get any other hosts? Because I think a lot of them actually this week are playing for host spots. I think Florida, I think Ole Miss, I think Alabama. Those three, come to mind right away. Like, those are potential hosts. You make a run in Hoover, single game, elimination tournament, which is different. This is the first year of that. With all, 18 going to Hoover, will be interesting. Will be interesting. I think the ACC will be interesting. I think, can Notre Dame get in? They've done a great job the second half of the year. I mean, they looked all but dead, 2 months, 6 weeks ago. They've made a run, done a great job. They got the 14 ACC wins. Can they get one more, maybe? Does that put them over? And I think the last one for me is Northeastern. Like, 45 wins is absolutely absurd. Like, it's wild. And I was listening to something today, and somebody was like, I wonder if they put in a bid to host. And I don't think they're going to end up getting to that, to that top 16 realm. But I mean, a team that has played as well as they have the last basically 2 months. I mean, they haven't lost since they played Campbell on that Sunday. They haven't lost the game. Like that, I wouldn't want to have them in my pod as the 2 seed. I'll put it that way.
Yeah, what they're doing, it's just ridiculous. They lost back-to-back games against BC and Towson, and they've lost one time since March 21st. It's just a wild run. To do that week in and week out, you go and you beat UConn twice. It was a really, really good team. They're flexing their muscle. they've left no doubt that they're in this tournament. They don't need to win the CAA tournament. It'd be nice icing on the cake. They've certainly earned it. But unlike last year, they've left no doubt. They're going to be a 2 seed, would be my guess. So yeah, that's what they're doing up there is phenomenal. I mean, they've been good for the better part of the last decade, but they've reached a different level the last couple of years, and this is kind of the pinnacle at this point of what they've been able to do. And it's just to show up week in and week out like that is so much harder than people realize. To do what they've been doing. So, Coach Glass, what do you got?
My 3, I suppose. I'll be quick. Maybe not the most surprising, but I do think it's interesting that in their first year, Texas wins the SEC. A lot of questions surrounding that. Obviously, there was a lot of drama last year at the end when Texas A&M and Coach Schlossnagle leaves A&M to go take the Texas job. And then obviously, as a caveat to this story, what the roller coaster ride of what A&M was this year, preseason number 1 to likely being the first ones on the outside looking in ever with, getting swept at Mizzou. Tough. The other one, Georgia Tech winning the ACC. Thought that was, they played really good baseball. They were up and down. I know they struggled a little bit towards the end, but to win the ACC at Georgia Tech in Coach Hall's last year there is he's announced his retirement. So I think that's a pretty good storybook ending there to a really good career. And then the last one, and I hope I'm not stealing this from you, Andy, but the Columbia Lions have secured the Ivy League bid, winning the conference tournament championship over the this past weekend. And I believe, Andy, you can correct me on if my stat correct me. But every single Columbia Lion who has played for Coach Beretti between 2013 and who will graduated from 2013 until now 2028 has now won an Ivy League championship and will be playing in the NCAA tournament, which essentially covers the demographic of 18 to 34 years old, which is an insane stat to kind of throw out there and think about, that at least one time in every player's career who's graduated between 2013 and 2028 will have played in at least one NCAA tournament if you're a Columbia Lion under Brett Beretti. And we're going to have him on the podcast. He's agreed to it. When we nail down that date is to be seen. But I am Coach Beretti I respect Coach Beretti. I have the utmost respect for him. I think he's a phenomenal human being. I think he's an unbelievable baseball coach, is just as evidence of what he's been able to do at Columbia. But that's an insane kind of stat to think about in this game, that for spanning 22 years of graduates, 15 years, what is it, 15 years, 12 years of graduates? What is that? 15. That's the history major in me for all you Marist guys. But 15 years of graduates to be able to have played in at least one NCAA tournament, that's remarkable. That is just nothing short of really being an incredible thing to be able to be a part of there, and also watch from the outside looking in that they're that good. So, I thought that was, that one, maybe not so much that they won it. I know they were the co-champions, and then they had lost the head-to-head to Yale. So they were the 2 seed technically in the tournament. They had another great year, but to see that stat roll out I think Sunday or Monday night, I was like, my goodness, that's absurd. So I wanted to throw that out there and give Coach Beretti and the Columbia Lions some love.
I think the thing to highlight, because people will be like, oh, well, there's teams that have made the tournament for 15 consecutive years. You have to win a championship to get in the tournament when you're in the Ivy League.
Right.
You're not getting an at-large bid. Now, they've had a couple teams that were on the cusp, right? And Penn has had a couple teams that, they were high enough in the RPI where they were at least in a discussion at some point. But I think the unique thing is you're talking about lifting a trophy.
Yep.
Every one of those kids has lifted a trophy, which allows them to go to that tournament. And that's the unique thing about it, is that, if you're one of these SEC programs they've been in the tournament for 21 straight years. Like, yeah, that's a great accomplishment, but it's different, right? 'Cause you don't have to win anything to get there. They have to win something.
Yeah. You just have to win games during the regular season.
Yeah.
You don't have to win. You don't have to win the tournament to get in.
Yep. And I mean,
some years you do, and they do, but this is an every year thing that you have to win the tournament in order to advance to the NCAA tournament.
And also shout out Ben Fischel, EMD baseball guy. Love him. Played a huge role in them getting to where they went this year. So shout out Benny. Freshman at Columbia, played a pretty big role this year in helping them get there. So pretty proud of him finding his way in that program. He's got a great career ahead of him. I'd be remiss to not shout out the Holy Cross Crusaders, Coach Kahovic, Coach Tinkham, who we've had on the podcast. They ended the West Point, the Army, 6-year streak in dominance. 7-year streak in dominance in the Patriot League. Great job by that staff. Great job by those players. I mean, another one, a heck of an accomplishment to, they won the regular season, which I think means a ton. And me and you, Jonathan, have talked about this. The regular season championship it may not get you the berth into the NCAA tournament, but that's the most telling thing when you're looking at like how a team plays out over the course of the season. And then in fitting fashion, they had to beat the champs to get there. And, they were able to do it in pretty dramatic fashion last night. Walk-off double in the 10th. It's just a great job by that program. Like, Army's a tough one to get over. They've been dominant in that conference for like I said, 7 years now. And great job by that staff. Great job by that team. And obviously, best of luck to them. We'll see where they're going to end up on Monday during the selection show.
Yeah, I mean, you had talked about this. I'm so fired up for those guys, man. Like, Coach Tanks, works his butt off, does a great job. I mean, between what they did in the regular season and what Yale did in the regular season, and obviously Yale didn't get over the hump, unfortunately, but what those two programs have done in the last 3 to 4 years with new staffs, out all the time, finding good players, working. It's good to see some good guys get rewarded, and I was so fired up last night for those guys that, and Coach Tinks obviously, is a good friend of mine as well, and we're very close. But to see them, hoist that trophy last night was really cool. That's a tough gig in that league, with what they have and the resources that this school gives them, and everything else. So, super pumped that they not only won the regular season, but then were able to, get a chance to go and play in a regional, in a week and a half.
We're going to have some more trophies lifted here over the next week or so, and going to have some more tickets punched. I think one of the big, and it's always interesting this time of year, is figuring out who's going to steal bids. Because it has a pretty dramatic impact. Like, you got a bunch of teams that are either trying to play their way into this. Like we mentioned, Notre Dame at the top of it. They're sitting 40 in the RPI. They play Boston College in 26 minutes if they're able to get that game off in time. They're right on the cusp of it. But they probably need a few things to fall their way, right? Teams like UConn and Xavier, if they don't win their conference tournament, one of those teams has the resume to be an at-large. But if you lose a bunch of bids to some of these leagues, and we'll get into some of the leagues that I think people need to keep an eye on if you track this, Kentucky last night, they really needed that win, and they didn't get it. But they have a resume from an RPI perspective. They play in the SEC. They got those 13 SEC wins. They didn't play Missouri. Be interesting to see if the committee takes that into account. Because if you followed Missouri's season this year, they didn't win a lot of games. They had one good weekend against Texas A&M, and otherwise they were pretty much a guaranteed 3 wins for everybody in the SEC. And Kentucky didn't play them. I wonder if that's going to play a factor. You got a bunch of teams that are going into conference tournaments that have a chance to kind of solidify themselves. Like, I'm looking at Troy. Troy's sitting at 42. They're a popular team. they didn't lose a weekend series until they got swept last weekend by Southern Miss. But you're sitting at 42. You finished third in your conference. You probably need a couple wins to feel good about yourself going into this, even though you've been a little bit of a darling, right? Cal Poly's another one, 23-7, heading in the right direction, but you're sitting at 44 from a non-Power 5 conference. Like, you need some stuff to go your way if you don't end up winning it. So a couple conferences that I have in mind, like Jonathan, you led off with Northeastern. They're getting in. UNC Wilmington's a really good team, and they're playing well right now. If you're one of these bubble teams, you are crossing your fingers that Northeastern wins that tournament, because that is a bid that's going to get stolen. If they don't, that's one that comes to mind for me. The other couple that I want to throw out there, you got Conference USA with Dallas Baptist being in. They're actually potentially playing themselves into a host conversation. If they can win that tournament, I think that they legitimately are in host conversation with their current RPI, which they're sitting at. They're sitting at 18. So they win that tournament, they'll be in that conversation. You got the American with UTSA looking like the only surefire team that's going to get in. You got Charlotte and ECU that are always a threat in that conference. You got the Big West with Irvine. You got the Big East, which I think has a chance to be a bid stealing league. And yeah, those are the ones that popped off for me. Any thoughts on that?
The only other one I think would, and I don't think it's going to end up being a bid stealer, because I think it's going to all kind of shake itself out. But I think the Southland was the other one that we had talked about. With UTRGV.
Yeah, they're sitting 41.
CELA, like the one thing with the 40s, which what I will say is that last year we kind of saw precedent with Florida getting in over Northeastern and Charleston, and I believe it was 41 and 42 or 42 and 43, respectively, for those two. We've kind of seen a little bit of precedent with the new committee that they're going to lean a little bit more on, the power conferences. So I think there's something to be said about that, where I think like the Southland, they'll put the first four out, and, hopefully we're going to do a live show here next Monday and have a ton of fun with you guys. But I think you could easily see CELA or Rio Grande Valley, first four out, 42 RPI, 41, 41, I think you just said, Andy. We've kind of seen that precedent be set already, where you're like, all right, yeah, Kentucky's in, or, insert power school here that's on the bubble, that they've gotten precedent over the last few years, as opposed to the mid-major in the 40s, which is a conversation for another day. We're not going to talk about that tonight. But I think the Southland is one of those ones that it probably is not going to really matter, because I don't think that they're going to put one of those teams in over a Kentucky, over a, maybe even a Notre Dame, some of these other, Kansas State maybe. But the Southland's the other one that could be that wild card just a little bit.
Yeah, because Southeastern Louisiana sitting at 54, UTRGV sitting at 41. Lamar sitting at 61. If you're either of those teams and you beat Lamar, that legitimately moves the needle for you. If you're Rio Grande Valley and you can find a way to beat Lamar, and you can find a way to get a win against Southeastern Louisiana, and maybe you don't win the tournament, those two wins might move you up. So and if you're in the 40s, you shouldn't say in the 40s, if you're in the top 40 in the RPI, you got a pretty good shot of getting in, barring a bunch of random tournament bids that end up.
The other part too, and this can't be unsaid, right? And this doesn't go for Rio Grande Valley, because the other two are not in the top 50. But those other two, if they beat UTGRV, those are quad one wins. And the committee has been adamant that they're going to look at quad 1 and quad 2 wins. Now, obviously, Rio Grande Valley will have the wins in quad 2 if they beat both of those opponents. But if you're CLA, you're going, especially for an at-large bid, right? Like, let's say you beat Grand Valley and then they beat you twice in the championship. Well, that's another quad 1 win for you. So, like, that's a big deal. Like, according to the committee, it's a big deal, right? Like, those quad 1 wins and the quad 1 and quad 2 wins, they're saying they're combining them now are a big deal. So, like, you know, and even for Rio Grande Valley, right? Like, if you win and let's say you lose in the championship game to CLA or even Lamar, you're going to have a bunch of quad 2 wins then to get there. So I think that's something to consider in this whole thing.
For sure. I mean, there's definitely some things that are going to get really interesting here in the next couple of weeks, and there's going to be a handful of teams that are going to be sitting there watching. Like, UC Santa Barbara came in as a top 25 team. They're starting to play well. They've been playing well for a couple of weeks. They had a stretch there where they didn't look like they were very good this year. They got a horse at the front end that is as good as anybody in the country. If they win that Big West tournament, that's at least one bid that got stolen. And they could very well win that thing. You know, Poly could very well win that thing. You know, that's an interesting conference. You know, the American, you know, Charlotte's a good ball club this year. You know, they've been playing good baseball. Let's see, they're 57, they're 36-20 right now. You know, that's a team that can absolutely win that tournament. And, you know, like we're talking about some of these teams, and shoot, man, you know, Troy and Notre Dame and UConn and Xavier, like you got to win some games here this week if you want to make sure that you're in that conversation. Otherwise, it could certainly slip away. I mean, you got USC, another team. You know, 3 weeks ago looked like they were a lock. They've slipped a little bit. They probably got to win a couple games in the Big Ten tournament to get back inside that top 40. Oklahoma State is surging. They're on the better side of 500 in the Big 12 right now. That's another club that's playing for their lives. You know, they win 2 or 3 games in the Big 12 tournament, they're going to get into that mix. But you got to pray that some of these other conferences don't drop the ball and hurt you with some of these stolen bids. The other team that I think is going to be an interesting study in how the committee views things is going to be this Virginia ball club. There's only been one time since 2013 where an above 500 ACC team did not make the NCAA tournament. Virginia is going to test that policy. They're 16-11 in conference right now, 32-17 in overall. They're sitting 56 RPI. Typically, 56 RPI is not getting you in the tournament. But 16-11 in the ACC almost certainly does. I would say they probably need to get a win, maybe 2 in the tournament to feel really good about themselves. But to your point, is the committee going to judge the fact that they play in the ACC and look at their ACC record, and they're going to disregard some of the less than stellar midweek losses that they had early on in the season and a couple slip-ups that they had from a series perspective early on in the season? Are they going to be willing to overlook that and go, hey, if you're 16-11 in the ACC, you should be an NCAA tournament team? I don't know.
I think we've seen some precedent. Like, I believe Florida was 55 last year, 54 in the RPI. I believe they were in the 50s. I could be wrong on that.
See if I can find that.
See if you can look that up. But I think we've kind of seen, like, and I know I've gone back and forth on this. If you've been a loyal listener, and I've gone back and forth because I was really disappointed last year in the whole Northeastern Charleston thing not getting in. But I just think there's certain parameters that if you play in these leagues they just have to be automatics. Like 14 or 15 SEC wins, you're in. There's no questions. And that includes the tournament. And in my opinion, in the ACC, because I think it's a little bit of a step down, not much, but a little. I think 15 to 16 ACC wins you should be a lock. If you win 15 or 16 games in that league, like, and I know it's a little bit, maybe it's a little bit dilated, this year because, Cal and Stanford were not very good. Boston College obviously had a down year, but I just don't know if you can just tell me hey, we should take somebody else when one of these teams lost on a Tuesday to blank team when you're rolling out 15 or 16 ACC wins. That's just, I don't know. In my opinion, the SEC is 14, including the tournament. ACC is 15. Once you hit that number, it's yep, you're in. And again, maybe an anomaly here or there, but 99% of the time you hit those numbers in those leagues, you got to be in. I just, these leagues are too good. If you're winning that many games, you're one of the best 64 teams in the country. That's just the reality of it.
I can't find where Florida was at pre-tournament.
Well, they finished post-tournament, which is obviously 10th. Very good.
10th.
Okay, so then I am off.
But they obviously,
but all of their wins were more than likely quad one wins.
All for the last, for the most part, outside of maybe one or two.
But still, you know what I mean? But I don't they were high last year because we were on the Gators shouldn't be in the tournament track. But I also think looking back in comparison to the UVA team this year, it's kind of the same thing, right? Florida disproved the argument of should they have been in on paper statistically, sure, because they were 36 and whatever, they had 30 whatever wins, 28, 30 wins. And then
they were
13 and 17 in the SEC.
Yeah.
But on roster wise and on paper, talent wise, they're one of the best 64 teams in the country. And I don't think we ever argued against that. And I don't think we're arguing against that with UVA. They just haven't done it consistently enough on the field for us to be this is definitely a team. But if we're just looking at this without, it's the best way to put this for us, without the actual baseball acumen, right? If we're just looking at, do they have the talent and have they hit the numbers? Then I agree with you. I think it's really hard for a team that was 16-11 in the ACC and the second best conference in the country to be no, they're not one of the best 64 teams in the country. And you can explain away some of those losses, and I think sometimes it's better to lose early, almost like in football. Hey man, we're figuring it out in March and April, and then they stumbled a little bit, but 16-11 in the ACC ain't nothing to sneeze at. And I think that's, I agree that I think they have to win a game or two to really feel good about themselves. Because if you lose to the winner of BC Notre Dame, if you lose that game, you're sweating it out through Sunday or through Monday night for the selection show. But if you go win one or two games, you're going to feel,
especially if it's Boston College, because the RPI, then you're right. If Boston College beats Notre Dame tonight and then they beat you tomorrow in terms of UVA, you're
sweating it out.
Yeah.
Because Notre Dame's not going to kill you, but and again, take nothing away from Boston College. As a caveat to this conversation, I'm glad it was brought up. Those guys did a phenomenal job with what is going on in Boston College from just a roster perspective. Not to put anybody down, but that roster is not necessarily constructed right now to win as many games in the ACC as they did. Those guys did a phenomenal job with what they have right there. But the fact still remains, it is what it is. Their RPI is a lot lower. They're at the bottom of the ACC. If you lose that game, it's cut and dry. It is what it is. But I don't. I would say right now, I would think that they are in. I think if you win one or two games, you're a lock. But if you lose, you're sweating this one out, especially if it's BC. You're sweating it out through Sunday and then bids. If you have some bid stealers in there, like you might be on the outside. You might be that first four out come Monday night.
All right, put it this way. A little quick research here. What I'm seeing is the lowest ranked RPI team to get an at-large bid was actually last year when Indiana got in with an RPI of 55.
Ooh, okay.
Florida State got in with 50 with an RPI of 50 in 2019. And the formula was a little bit different back then, but it looks like correct. Apologies, I'm wrong. And then TCU got in with 55 at one point as well.
Yeah, I remember when TCU got in with 55. That was seniors last year, though, wasn't it? In 2019.
Who's?
Mike Martin Sr.
Yeah, I think it was.
Yes.
And I think that was like that board. And then they ended up in Omaha, too.
Yeah, it was his last year because he retired right before COVID.
Yeah.
Let's see what their ACC record was that year for.
I can tell you. Give me 1 second.
I'll race it.
I can't.
But it's like, once again, even if Virginia wins a couple games, right? I think that if they win 2 games, they probably firmly get into the 40s, and I don't think there's any way they get left out if their RPI's in the 40s.
I actually think they only need one. If you win one time, I think you're fine.
Florida State was 17-13 that year.
Yeah, you're in. You're in. I just it's 16 ACC wins. I don't know.
Yeah, I agree with you. Kentucky, I think, is going to be the most interesting exercise in all of this. 29 wins. For some reason, that just looks terrible on paper. Like 30 looks so much better than 29. It really does. Their RPI lines up for sure. I think they're 35. They'll drop a little bit probably just because of some teams will move, but there'll be a little bit of a shuffle. They'll probably end up staying about the same. Let me step that back. They got some really good SEC wins. They got some bad SEC weekends. And they got a couple really bad midweek losses. I'll be really curious to see what ends up happening with them, because they would be a unique case of a 30 RPI team not getting in. I believe that there's been a higher ranked RPI team that hasn't gotten in the past. I think South Carolina got left out at like 28 or 29 not long ago, but I have not fact checked myself on that. But 29 wins. My thought is they need things to fall perfect for them to get that bid. But if that committee is serious about, the 13 or 14 win mark, right? They got the 13 win mark, which Florida got to last year, and they ended up getting in. Kentucky doesn't have the midweek resume that Florida had, right? So that doesn't help. But that Missouri stuff is what's interesting to me, is that if you just say that they win the series against Missouri, we're not even having this conversation, because 15 gets you in every day, twice on Sundays. And I wonder if the committee is going to take that into consideration, because they're one of the few SEC teams that did not play Missouri this year.
I texted you guys this a couple weeks ago before, obviously, the A&M weekend. And one of the things that was mentioned was, how does the committee judge SEC, total wins, right? Like total wins with Missouri on the schedule and without Missouri on the schedule? I think and I said this after the A&M weekend, because I was on the board of just eliminate those 3 wins, but then you also have to kind of take a percentages, right? Obviously, because you can't just eliminate those 3 wins because that's not fair. But how do you judge? And obviously they swept A&M, so maybe you count them the same as all other SEC wins. But how do you judge a team that's at 13 or 14? And 14 is going to get you in, so it's not even going to be that. But like you said, Andy, they didn't play Missouri. So if you take one weekend away, and even if they went 1-2, but they played Missouri, that's 2 extra wins. Like you said, 15's in every time, twice on Sunday. We're not even talking about this. How does the committee judge that they didn't get a chance to play a team that basically everybody outside of Texas A&M blew their doors off?
Fair question.
Well, and I think there's a key piece of the statement you just said there. Outside of the A&M weekend, right? And I don't want to pile on the Missouri train here, but they weren't even competitive. Not even competitive. They had a weekend where they didn't play more than 7 innings in a game. They got mercy ruled 3 consecutive times. That's unheard of in that conference.
Yeah, games get away, but that it doesn't happen like that. Here's the other. Now, not to tie this back into UVA right away, but they also lost. They had an entire series wiped at Florida State because of weather. So it's does that factor in as well? Because and it's hard to do, right? What if they go in? If they win in Tallahassee and win that series, we're not having this conversation. No. They're an 18-11. They're an 18-12 team and they're a lock.
Yeah, they're probably a 2.
You know what I mean? That's something to factor in. We can play this game all day long, and I'm not saying you're wrong. I just wonder, I'm wondering out loud as well, how much is that going to factor in? Because you can do it. You can do it with every team who played Missouri in the SEC. You can do it with Florida State. You're not going to do it with Florida State because their RPI is so high and they had a great year. But what if Virginia went in and won that series? What if they swept them? You know what I mean? We're not even having this conversation out there. Right. We're not even having this conversation. But
let's be honest, they're not a host.
No. But I wonder what I don't think that you can discount, and again, not to pile on the Mizzou stuff, but I don't think you can discount it with what they rolled out there. I'm not trying to be negative towards the kids or the program or anything, but from a pure competitive standpoint in the SEC, that is a visible step below with what and it bears out in the numbers. I mean, they didn't win a game in conference until the second to last series of the year, where quite honestly, no one thought that was going to happen, but it did. And that's why this game's awesome. But you can't be 3-27 in the league and also stand on the fact that it's a competitive advantage or disadvantage for the teams that didn't play them. And that's just the truth. When you get into athletics, that is the God's honest, absolute truth. Because for 9 other teams, those are 3 guaranteed wins on your roster or on your schedule. Excuse me. That some other teams in that league didn't even have the opportunity to get and had to play a tougher. I think you're right, Jonathan. I think that I don't you can work up the mathematical equations for it, but I think that has to be factored in. And I do think that factors in with Kentucky, especially being on the bubble, having not played them. That is absolutely because if they played them, what are they, 30, they're a 32 win team, 31, 32 win team. Maybe win a game or 2 in the conference tournament, you're good.
And it's 15, potentially 16 wins in the SEC. Right. You get to 15, it's over. You're in. Yeah. 30 wins and 15, it's not even 30, just 15 wins, you're in. Yeah, I understand they Missouri swept Texas A&M, which is fine, but They also lost 27 games in the 28 games because they lost today, and they only played 9 innings, like 2/3 of those games, if that. I just think it's hard to not give credit to Kentucky because the way the math worked, this year they didn't play them.
Right. No, I agree. I think I think this is true across a lot of college baseball, not just specifically in this scenario where, like, when you have unbalanced scheduling and you can't have the opportunity to play everyone, you have teams that not in the SEC or ACC where, everyone makes the conference tournament and your RPI is going to jump and you can make a run, where, like, you might be left out of the conference tournament because you didn't play the bottom 2 or 3 teams in that league that aren't good. And that, like, it's hard to sit in those meetings and have those conversations as coaches and be like, well, we didn't play the bottom 3 teams and we missed the conference tournament by a game. Like, if I flipped one of these series, I'm probably the 2 or 3 seed. And I think that's a hard thing. Like, it's hard to rectify in this game because there are teams, regardless of conference division, that are not good. And it's not an every year thing. Sometimes it is. In most cases it's not. But, like, sometimes you just don't, like, it's just not good. But when you miss those wins, it dings you in a lot of different ways from being able to play in the postseason. And in case in point is Kentucky this year on a national level where, like, yeah, they're on the bubble and they missed 3 wins. Obviously we have to play it on the field, but, like, playing percentages here, that's 3 wins for that Kentucky team. And, I think it absolutely has to be factored in that room when they're having the conversation about, bubble teams and who's in and where they're going, that is an absolute factor going into that conversation.
One other thing I want to bring up before we close this out. I think this would be kind of unprecedented. Correct me if I'm wrong, Jonathan. You're the resident historian here. If Coastal wins the Sun Belt tournament, I think they're a national seed. You're talking 47 wins, complete dominance of a really good conference. They're currently 11 in the RPI. They likely have to beat Southern Miss and or Troy, which is going to move the needle from an RPI perspective. Alabama, LSU, if they don't win the tournament, they probably bare minimum stay the same. Clemson could drop. Like, there's a legitimate scenario where Coastal could end up inside the top 8 from an RPI perspective. They have the facility to do it. I would say that they have the resume to do it. I think they're firmly a host, right? I think if Southern Miss ends up winning their tournament, you might see 2 host sites come out of the Sun Belt. I think that's a likely scenario as well, with Southern Miss sitting at 21 with the RPI points that they could accumulate if they're able to win that tournament. I think you probably have 2 coming out of there, but the big one for me is, like, Coastal being a national seed would be incredible. It'd be awesome for baseball.
It'd be amazing. One thing, and I'm not disputing any fact here. The one thing, just for clarity's sake, when we talk about this stuff on here, for people who are maybe not as sick about college baseball as we are, national seeds. When you hear us say national seeds, it's 1 through 8. When you hear us say host, that's going to be 9 through 16. They're hosting, and then when it gets to supers, the top 8s are going to host the super regionals, so on and so forth. So I noticed as we've been talking about it, we throw it around because we know what we're talking about. But if you're listening and you can't follow along with that, like, the nationals are your 1 through 8 hosts are going to be 9 through 16. When it gets to, like, those 16 regionals will be held at that place with the 4 teams, and then the national ones are the ones that host their super regionals. So I noticed it earlier. Jonathan was like, they're going to get 6 nationals, and I was like, ooh, people might not actually know what we're talking about here. But go ahead.
And just to add on, a national seed is going to host as long as they win their regional. So like there are years where a national seed could potentially lose. So then you're pairing. There could be some a little bit disparity, but yes, Keith's 100% right. 1 through 8 national seed, they are going to host. 1 through 16 will host regional sites, and then if you get to a super, again, as long as those 1 through 8 win, you would host. But there are years where it happens. I mean, we had it happen last year, right? Like we've had national seeds not get through. So that is for sure. Back to your question, Andy. I don't know of a mid-major that's been a national seed that has been a national seed, to be honest with you. I can't think of one off the top of my head. Dallas Baptist is obviously host. Coastal is obviously hosted. But we've also only been in the national seed realm for like a couple of years. We're not like totally into it yet. Like we're like a lot of years where like there's a lot of data points. One thing I think is a good question is I think if LSU, here's my couple bullet points to Coastal to get into a national seed. Coastal would have to win out and have to win the tournament. That would be the bottom to even get into this conversation. That would be 1. 2, I think, because you're going to have wins against Southern Miss and Troy in the tournament, and you're going to probably have to beat Southern Miss twice, if I were to guess. But that's kind of the starting point. I think LSU would probably have to lose on Thursday, their opening round. And I think the other question would be, and this is like weird because we've never been in this scenario, Oregon State's not playing. They're sitting at home right now.
Currently sitting 6. If it all ended right now, they're a national seed.
But they're sitting at home.
Yep.
So they're not doing anything right now. Does the committee look at that differently? And again, this is the first time we've ever had this because we've never had an independent with a resume like theirs. Does the committee look at that different because of Coastal running through the Sun Belt and say, hey, well, we're going to move a team down and move Coastal in because they sat at home all weekend?
It's a good question.
Right? Like, and we've never had this happen. Like, we've never been in this scenario.
We're going to find out in 6 days, and that's what the fun part is.
The other one, too, is if Oregon goes like 2 and a Q in the Big Ten tournament, because I think they're a double elimination, that could be another scenario that could also probably play into a national seed potentially for Coastal. I think it's tough, though. My gut tells me that they're going to be 10, 11, 12, if I were to guess.
Fair enough. Any other closing thoughts?
Yeah. You have Division II and Division III Supers underway this weekend. Their regionals kicked off last weekend. I would be remiss to not shout out the Fighting Engineers of RPI who made it to the regional final with the number 1 overall seed in Johns Hopkins. But there's some really good baseball being played at the Division II and Division III level this weekend in Supers as well. I know I was texting you guys today that I have a slight bone to pick with the Division II. How many teams we're getting in? There's 8 regionals with 3 teams in the regional, which like I wonder, like you're telling me that there's not one team in all of those regionals that we can add into it to get 4-team double elimination tournaments instead of playing the weird like the lowest seed plays somebody, and then if they win, whoever wins or whoever loses plays the other team who hasn't played yet, and then there's 2 left. You play a 3-game set. If not, you play other. It's a wild kind of setup. So if along with adding more dates to Division III stuff, like I would wave my magic wand and add more teams into the Division II tournament so that we have it. But there's a lot of Division II and Division III being played this weekend as well, and I think especially at the Division III level, you know, if you're around some of the places that are hosting supers, and a lot of them are there are some in the Northeast, Mid-Atlantic, Midwest. Like, get out there and watch some of those games because it's high-level baseball being played, not just the Division I conference tournaments that are going on. So I just wanted to at least shout out our Division II and Division III guys because they're getting deeper into their postseason with what they have going on, and I think there's some really good baseball to be played. I know Case and Hopkins, I think, is probably one of the best ones out there this weekend down in Baltimore. Case Western and Hopkins are playing. Lynchburg and Rowan is probably going to be a really good season or series. Excuse me. Salve and Kane are playing down in Jersey, which will be good. So I think there's a lot of really good baseball being played at the Division III level this weekend. So if you're around those places or you're streaming it, follow up and watch some really good Division III baseball. That's my closing thought.
Well said. A lot of baseball going on right now. Tune in. You can pretty much watch baseball from 9 a.m. until midnight. Possibly.
I've been watching.
I'm in that realm.
I shouldn't even say I've been watching. We've all been texting since 9 o'clock this morning when the ACC tournament kicked off.
I dropped
it hasn't stopped on my TV.
I couldn't have been more excited to fire up Miami and Cal at 9 a.m. when I got home.
Oh, yeah. It was great.
We're sick, but it's fun. Jonathan, you're the man. We're going to do this a couple more times over the next couple weeks. Tune in next week. We will go over the bracket. We will have bones to pick on who got left out. I'm sure we'll have some thoughts. It's always an interesting time. Otherwise, tune into some tournaments. Watch the baseball, D1, D2, D3. Check it out. Ton of good baseball to watch. And enjoy. Thanks, everybody. Thank you for listening this week. If you're watching on YouTube, go ahead and hit that subscribe button and smash that like button for us. Check us out on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, as well as Spotify. You can follow us on Twitter and Instagram at EMD Baseball. If you want to find out what me and Keith do to help families and players navigate the recruiting process, go ahead and check us out on emdbaseball.com. Take a few minutes to check out our new online academy. I promise you'll get some good information out of that. Thanks again for listening. Check in with you next week.